So in a lot of my previous videos, I've spoken a lot about, team communication and the bandwidth of, the communication bandwidth that we're all limited to. When we're playing a game of Dota, there are 5 players in one Discord channel most times, and realistically, only one person can be speaking at any one given time. And there's also different periods during a game where there's more bandwidth, the higher bandwidth capacity than others. When it's during the laning stage, and there's a lot more flexibility and wiggle room to kind of elucidate more complex, more robust ideas. Whereas if both teams are kind of jockeying for positioning before the initiation of a team fight, if both teams have an observer ward on a 360 cliff vision, both teams see each other, which team's going to make the first move. During that, there's a lot less bandwidth because it's such an intense moment. You need to only be communicating things that are hyper specific and critically important, like identifying, does one of the heroes have a newly purchased BKB or something that can fundamentally change the way you want to approach the team fight. And, or if it's not that, maybe it's, who you're blinking on, who you're initiating on. But there are moments that are extremely intense where you really have to be hyper specific and short with what you're saying. And there's more times, and there are other times, like during a laning phase, where there is a lot more bandwidth capacity, like I said, to speak to more complex, robust ideas. So, but in all my previous videos, I've only spoken to this idea of like information sharing and how just crazy important it is to share information. And in this video, I want to break down the team's overall bandwidth, because I've only ever spoken to this idea of like what information to share and how to share it efficiently in previous videos, and I'm sure it's come across as me potentially suggesting that in team comms, you should only be talking about this critical information that's going to affect how other people play the game. But in reality, that isn't the best way to maximize bandwidth. And if we were AIs, if we were robots, then sure, yeah, we don't have we're not people, we don't have personalities. Maybe that is the best way to only share this information related to the game. But we are human beings, so we really need to approach this through a biopsychosocial perspective, or this holistic humanistic approach, because we are playing with and dealing with human beings. So it's important to understand that just focusing entirely on just like game stuff and efficiency actually won't maximize performance. There's a certain threshold where it will actually hurt performance. So if this bar is the team's bandwidth, let's say that we are during a laning phase, and there's quite a bit of bandwidth capacity. There is room to potentially make jokes with your team, to banter back and forth a little bit. Like, we play Dota to have fun. And even beyond a lot, this video is going to be presented to, players in amateur Dota leagues where the core purpose is having fun. But I would even extend that into the professional scene, where teams that are having fun and enjoying the company and enjoying the process of playing with one another are going to perform better than teams that are just buckling down, wired in, acting like AIs, only talking about, Dota related information and trying to be all super serious and have no fun at all. Teams that are more relaxed and enjoying themselves are going to perform better. So even though I'm going to be presenting this through the lens of the amateur Dota scene, this is applicable to like really competitive, potentially professional teams too. So this is the full bandwidth of, or the full capacity of bandwidth of communication that we have at our disposal here. So there's 3 things that we could fill up our team's bandwidth bar, I guess you could say. And number 1, that is actually like sharing of important information regarding the game. Let's say for this example, we are during the laning phase. Let's say minute 330 or something, right? So we could plug in, we could use our team's communication bandwidth to share information. And we could use our team's bandwidth to share information that is important for other people to know. So for example, if your mid is laning against a Storm Spirit and the Storm Spirit picks up a Arcane Room and he just takes off to the bottom lane, it's going to be very, very important for your team's mid player to say, to say to the team, hey guys, Storm Spirit got an Arcane Room and he's going bottom, because that will drastically affect how the two heroes in the bottom lane will play, and that's super important, for them to know. So there's information regarding the game that we do want to plug into here. But also, with us being human beings and approaching this from a robust humanistic perspective, we are here to have fun, and it's important to have fun. You want to enjoy yourselves and enjoy the process of playing with your teammates. So there's also going to be just normal, just chatting and banter, and that's actually very, very important to plug in here. To chatting and banter, right? So that is making jokes with your friends, maybe heckling someone a little bit, and really tapping into your team's, I guess, social culture, and developing those relationships with your teammates, even during the duration of a game. So we have the information you could speak about, relating Dota. You could plug into the bandwidth. There's just the chatter and banter, just the social element. But there's also another thing that's important here, and that's just silence. And it's not necessarily a bad thing to not plug up your entire bandwidth capacity, your communication bandwidth capacity, with just people talking nonstop, whether it's information about Dota, whether it's just chatter and banter. Silence is okay too, and I would go as far as to say silence is important and another element of this communication bandwidth to take into consideration. Now, let's break down some colors here. So the info is going to be blue, we got red for chatter and banter, and then yellow for silence. Each team is going to maximize their performance with a different ratio of these three elements. So I would argue that the teams that have the most stakes, have the most at stake. So these professional teams, let's say we're even talking about a team competing in the international, their stakes are really, really high. So they collectively might want the majority of their bandwidth, whoopsie daisy, they might want the majority of their bandwidth, communication bandwidth, occupied by sharing of this relevant information. And then, it's still important to consider that chatter and banter, and maybe this might vary based on, the team and how they're feeling, what the mood is, kind of what the social dynamic is, in the moment is, and be able to, identify that and adapt to that. So it might be here sometimes, maybe it might be, up here sometimes, where there's a little more chatter, banter, maybe the team they're playing just isn't as good, and there's more time to kind of focus on that banter and, chatting it up with your friends. And then there's also going to be this element of silence. And during the laning phase, there's probably the least amount of demand for silence, but during the laning phase, oftentimes there's going to be the most silence, because there's not going to be a whole lot of super critical information that necessarily needs to be shared. It's going to be, general macro level things like, if that Storm Spirit got our Arcane and he's going bottom, the mid will definitely want to communicate that, right? But in general, someone in the top lane isn't going to need to be filled in on every single minutia and detail of things that are going on in the bottom lane. So the demand for silence is going to, vary. Where, like, even though during the laning phase there might be the most silence, that's just, kind of how it plays out naturally. Whereas, if we are in a situation where two teams have the same 360 high ground ward and they're kind of jockeying back and forth, trying to, get the more favorable team fight, in this case, all of a sudden, silence is way, way more important. So silence is way more important, in those moments, and you want to be extremely punctual and acute with the things that you're saying. You want to say what's important to say as efficiently as possible so the team can be filled in on that extremely pertinent information. Because when there's silence, the teams can actually focus on their individual mechanical execution, during these team fights. Like team fights elapse in the span of 6-8 seconds a lot of times. And when the winning or losing a team fight oftentimes can come down to milliseconds of when someone chains a stun, on abilities, or it comes down to the millisecond that someone blinks. Full on team fights can come down to milliseconds. So silence is very, very valuable in these hyper intense moments where this just raw mechanical execution is so important. So there's different phases of the game. There's the, and I just said kind of the two extremes were, during the laning stage, there's a lot more flexibility, and during right before team fights and during team fights, you have to be really, really careful with what you're saying and how you're saying it to really be as maximally efficient as possible, like in those team fight scenarios. So, and the right answer to this equation is really going to come down to team by team. And I've been speaking to a lot of Dota elements, in these last couple of minutes, but there's also this big team about just the individual play. A big element of this is just the individual players on a team. So if your team consists of 5 shy people who aren't super talkative, there's going to be a lot more silence, and that's okay. The actual information sharing will be a lot more scarce. It will probably be more punctual, more packed and concise with information. And just by nature of being shy, there won't be as much chatter and banter. But for a shy team, it might have a different looking breakdown where there is just going to be the majority silence. But it's really going to come down to what each team kind of expects, and the ratio of which team kind of works and operates the best in. So we are, to summarize this first point, we are human beings. It's important for us to be social, and we will play better when we're having fun and enjoying ourselves and really vibing in kind of the synergy of working together with other people. Now let's break down the actual info. So now in this next example, I'm going to be disregarding this chatter banner. I'm going to be disregarding the silence because, with this first part of the video, I wanted to really emphasize these things are important. And the ratio of these three things are dependent on the position you are in the game, as well as just their differences, between team by team. But in this next section, I'm going to be really focusing on this right here and really breaking this down. So let me open up a new file here, and we're going to bring up the same visual that I had in the last video. So we have all of the relevant information regarding a game of Dota. So all info regarding one game of Dota. And like I said in the last video, this is, abstract, hypothetical, but this bubble represents all the possible information that a team could kind of identify and assimilate and kind of synthesize into their knowledge pools. But it's impossible for a team to synthesize all information. So a team will have a pretty big slice of things, and teams want to work towards. So this inner bubble here is the information that the team is actually aware of and working with. It's important to teams to want to expand this bubble as far out as possible to encapsulate as much information as possible. But there are a lot of limitations. The further this expands, the more limitations there are. So there is kind of this, I guess, diminishing returns to just how far you want to expand this. So regarding this bubble of team information, let's make it a little bit smaller so I have more room as I kind of progress here. So we have the team information bubble, this all the information the team has, and obviously each player is going to be contributing to our information pie here in the middle. And this is a little bit of a summary of the last video. And we're going to have our red player, yellow, green, blue, and orange. So the same 5 players as last time. So now let's break down this actual, like the, of the 3 elements of communication bandwidth from last time, let's really just dive deep into information sharing. In these complex task environments, people are going to have to fill different roles. This is because these complex task environments require people to specialize. And upon specializing in a role, people are going to be thinking about certain information more than others, and each people are kind of going to have a specialty. So like I hinted in the last video, a mid player is going to be constantly critically thinking about wards. Me as a pos 5, I'm going to be constantly critically thinking about observers, or excuse me, the mid's going to be thinking about runes, and me as a pos 5, I'm going to be critically thinking a lot about warding and where my wards are, where the enemy wards are, and whatnot, right? And so I might think about power runes sometimes, but I'm never really going to be thinking critically about power runes because the mid player is, thinking critically about power runes. And I'm going to introduce the idea of transactive memory systems. A transactive memory system for a team working in these complex task environments is basically the system that it manifests on its own. So even in your Dota team, there is this transactive memory system working and operating, but obviously it's kind of working and operating in the abstract. We're not really thinking about it because, you might not know it exists. So I'm going to elucidate this natural, thing that manifests when we are, working together as a team in a complex environment like Dota, so that we can really, leverage it to maximize our team's performance. So a transactive memory system is basically a system where people identify other people, where team members identify everyone on the team has a specific role, and they also recognize that with these specialty roles, people are going to be thinking critically about different elements of the game. And they know they don't have to worry about these other elements because their teammates has that covered. And if there is something pertinent regarding this specific thing, if it's pertinent enough to share with the team, they will share it. So there is the team bubble where this is all the information that has been put into this team information bubble. So if I know that the enemy has a ward somewhere, I just can't get to it to deward it, I'll go ping, 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 hey guys, there's a ward there. So I put that bit of information up into the team bubble of shared information, and all the other players can pull that down and extract that and assimilate that into their own working knowledge about the game in real time in the moment. And the same thing with power runes potentially, like for a mid player. But since since I am all 5 players in a team has a limited cognitive capacity. With us working in this complex task environment, we can really only think critically about so many things before we reach our cognitive load, where we can't really process any more than what we're already processing. So these natural roles kind of are divided up naturally, between players. Since I'm always thinking so critically about warding, being a pos 5, I'm going to develop things called heuristics and kind of abstract conceptualizations about warding, because that's what I'm always thinking about. Heuristics being basically I can see patterns with, with warding. I can see specific patterns with warding that's really going to make my decision making and thought process, regarding all things wards a lot more just efficiently in my brain, since I'm constantly kind of working with that information. The same thing with power runes for the mid player, and everyone playing the different roles within the context of the game is going to have this more specialized information specifically to their role. So there are these artificial roles in the game. So in Dota, we have the pause 1, pause 2, pause 3, supports. There are these artificial roles really ingrained in the game, where, I join a team, I join a pub, and I'm playing pause 5, I'm playing pause 4, I'm playing pause 1. And that comes with having to process, different information just based on the role you're playing. And when you're in the context of a pub, it just might be, you processing the information that's relevant to your, actual, like, artificial, I'm going to call it artificial role. But when you're working in a competitive team where you're interacting with the same people, in this, like, I guess, organized team environment, let alone is each person go, actually, let me do some labels here. So the mid here is going to be the pause 2. Let's make yellow the pause 1. Blue pause 3. The orange is going to be the pause 4, and this guy's going to be pause 5. So the mid player is going to have this information about warding that is going to be, he's always going to be thinking critically about this, because he's the mid player. His gameplay is really kind of defined by, not warding, I'm so sorry, by runes. The mid's gameplay is really going to be defined by, like, rune control and whatnot, so he's always going to be thinking critically about those sorts of things. So there's the specialized information that just comes with the role, but there's also going to be specialized information that you kind of synthesize that's more individually based. So let's say just the pause 2 players as a player is really good at, whenever a enemy hero flashes in Fog of War, he's really good at clicking on that hero and seeing their items. So you can see the item progression of heroes. He has this kind of internal timer, this internal clock in his head, where he kind of sees the patterns and the development of the enemy's items and kind of what they're building and whatnot, right? Me as the pause 5, I'm always thinking about warding, thinking critically about warding, and, synthesizing and contributing information about warding to my team, like where I'm trying to get wards down, where the enemy's wards are. But let's say that I'm really good at kind of keeping track of the enemy's cooldown. So if they have, like, a black hole and chronosphere, I have a really good knack at kind of internalizing and tracking enemy ability cooldowns. So there's kind of two dimensions to information that's going to be exclusive and specialized to each player, and that's going to be information that's pertinent to the role, so runes for mid, and then also information explicit to the player. So, in this example, the pause 2 mid is really good at kind of the timing and the development of items on the enemy team, and I'm really good at, as the pause 5, I'm really good at kind of keeping track of abilities. So taking this back to team bandwidth and this idea of transactive memory systems, that a good, robust, a healthy, efficient transactive memory system, for a team, in this example, every single player, the pause 1 player, the pause 5, the pause 4, the pause 3, knows that the mid player is thinking critically and synthesizing a lot of information on runes. He's thinking critically and synthesizing a lot of information on items. So since the pause 2 mid is thinking critically and he's carrying the cognitive burden of runes and item timings for the enemy, now that burden is relieved from the pause 1, the pause 3, the pause 4, the pause 5. everyone else no longer has to think about those things because we know the pause 2 mid is thinking about those things. So now we don't have to. So now we could branch off and, take on different specialized roles to help us push out and expand our team's information bubble as much as humanly possible. So since the pause 3 knows the mid might be thinking about runes, or since the pause 3 knows the mid is going to be thinking about runes, and he trusts the mid, and he anticipates the mid sharing the critical information regarding runes, where they're spawning, who's picking it up. Now the pause 3 can focus more on the enemy's positioning in Fog of War. So he looks at heroes flashing in and out of Fog of War at a very, very, even in the abstract sense. Like he sees, heroes kind of, flashing here, flashing there, maybe clip into a ward vision. But he's really good at kind of painting this picture about like where they're all where all the enemy heroes are playing on the map, and able to synthesize all that information into kind of articulating like what their goals are and what their game plan is. So he's really good at, kind of parsing apart enemy location and goals. So the pause 2 mid player is thinking about runes, thinking critically about runes, and sharing all that pertinent information. And he, on the flip side, how the pause 3 is able to have this specialty role, since he knows the pause 2 is covering a lot of the important bits of information regarding runes. It's this kind of harmonious relationship where like everyone knows that people are thinking about different things within each Dota role, but we also recognize the individual strengths of players, so we can continue to specialize more and more and more and more, since we know everyone is synthesizing information, synthesizing different information, and the breadth of what I have to think about is going to be shrunk, so I can specialize more, since I trust my teams are, since I trust my teammates are thinking about and focusing on these other elements that I no longer have to worry about. So when it comes to communicating and this idea of limited bandwidth in comms, my teammates know that I'm really good at thinking about and considering where the enemy's ability cooldowns are at. So since my team knows that that's what I'm good at, and they've come to expect me to share that information that's critical, let's say the pause 1 just got his BKB and he's feeling really, really strong to go and fight. He says, hey, he communicates to the team, hey, I have my BKB, let's go take a fight. He's not thinking about the enemy black hole that's available because he trusts that I have that information kind of at hand. So he says, I have a BKB, let's go fight. He says that without considering the threat of the black hole, but he's not being what's the word I'm looking for? So, but the pause 1 is not being ignorant, not thinking about the black hole. He's just really able to focus entirely on his role with the things he's having to worry about, because he trusts that I'm going to keep track of that. So in response to him saying, hey, I have BKB, let's go fight, he's not being ignorant. He just knows that I have that kind of internal timer on the black hole. So now I can speak up and say, hey, if we do fight, we need to be careful. They do have black hole and, let's say, reverse polarity available. They have all their team fight abilities available. We need to be careful. And teams need to have conversations about what they expect each other to communicate because there is this limited bandwidth, especially this, like, with the three elements of things that you could fill the, kind of communication bandwidth with, information being one of them. Teams that are the best at this idea of efficient information sharing are only going to be sharing information that's related to their specialized roles. It's information that other people know that they don't have to worry about. So you're really creating this symbiotic harmony between all team members where everyone's just able to really just specialize more and more and more and think more critically about more and more specialized and focused things, since the entire team trusts everyone else that they're also thinking about their focus and specialized things, and they will share information critical to that as it is pertinent and as it is appropriate. But and obviously the expectations can change. And there's this other element called after action reviews, which is basically a scientific word for debriefing your team. So if the communication felt off, or someone on the team felt like something important wasn't shared, something critical wasn't shared after the game, because obviously there's so much stress and so much to worry about during a game. It's not really appropriate to have conversations like this during the game. But after the game, someone can say, hey, I feel like X, Y, and Z bits of information, critical, things that are really important for our success weren't communicated. Let's have a conversation about, whose responsibility was it to communicate that. And if it wasn't anyone's responsibility, then that responsibility can be assigned, and the teams can have a conversation about, like, who's focusing on what and who needs to communicate what. So, and during this time, teams can also talk about, like, what information are we all going to be aware of? Like, what things aren't necessary to communicate? Everyone is going to be in the loop about some information on the game that, and as you get higher and higher MMR, you're just going to be able to kind of keep track of more information about the game just on your own without relying on your team at all. So this is going to give, during these debriefs, you could talk about, like, hey, what team should we just expect everyone to kind of, identify and assimilate on their own, things that are redundant for us to fill our comms with, so that we can continue to focus on our own specialized roles. So what this will actually look like in practice is people focusing a lot on themselves and really thinking about and critically thinking about, their own timings, their own strengths, and, the things they're looking at, and they're able to, like, throw in more personalized, specialized, focused information that will expand this team information bubble out as much as possible. Now, tying the social safety back into this, in these teams where there are these specialized roles, these teams where they have communicated, hey, what's redundant, what do we not need to talk about, and what information about runes do we want from the mid player? What information about warding and ability cooldowns do we want from the pos 5? The team can ask each person in their specialties what information that they need to know that will help them with their decisions. So that's also the other important thing about these, after action reviews or debriefing, and talking about, what information is redundant, what do we not need to talk about, and what exact bits of information do we want from the specializers, what information do we want from the specializations, between all the team members. But like I said, tying social safety back into this, and why I talked about social safety first thing in my first video that I made, is that the more and more specialized and the more and more robust and developed a team gets, the more and more social synergy a team has. So the more developed and the more specialized and the more robust a team's transactive memory systems becomes, the higher the capacity that they could expand outward, right? And this social safety also comes in and really enhances these elements of specialization, because when there is that shared trust between team members, you can truly rely on people to relay information that you don't have to worry about, so you can continue in your own focus. But also, not only that, but also coming down to this whole idea of the importance of social safety is that now this team is just this social performance powerhouse. Let's talk about Tundra, the last international winners. I can't tell you whether or not they've explicitly had conversations about these things. I can't explicitly tell you if they've had this specialized training on communication and they knew about all these social performance elements, that operate behind the scenes. But even though I can't tell you if they've necessarily been focused and trained on these things specifically, I can tell you that based on interviews and things I know about the team, all these systems were firing on very, very high gear, which is why they outperformed everyone as much as they did in the international this past year. So this idea of transactive memory systems will literally let teams perform better, because it's this core element of social performance, and it is a huge contributor to the team's overall performance and just the amount they will win, period, end of discussion. But the more and more specialized people get, the more and more important social safety becomes, because let's say our red pause 2 mid player just has a meltdown and starts absolutely screaming and yelling at the pause 5, and the pause 5 gets mad and shuts down. Social safety is even more important the higher level teams get in regards to these things, because if the pause 5 shuts down, you're just not losing generic information that a pause 5 is going to be thinking about. Like, let alone are you just going to be losing kind of this slice of the pie. So now instead of working with 5/5 of the pie, now your team's suddenly operating with only 4/5 of the pie. So already you're losing 1/5 of the pie here just by that person shutting down. But when teams are this specialized and this efficient in their social performance, you're not just losing this piece of the pie where you're now working in 4/5 of the pie instead of 5/5. You're also losing the specialization of that player. So now you're also losing, how keen the pause 5 is on kind of the timings of hero abilities. And now your team is kind of specialized and rely on the pause 5 to communicate this. But if the pause 5 shuts down, all of a sudden you're not getting this information on ability timings and him contributing that information to help everyone else inform their decisions. You're not getting this information on warding from this person anymore. So he doesn't talk about where he wants to ward, where he thinks the enemy wards are. All of a sudden, all this is gone. So you're not just losing this bit of the pie, you're losing all that specialty information that no one else is really expected or has trained to or learned to think about to contribute. So you lose so much more when someone kind of taps out, when teams do become the specialized. So it's this weird give and take where, like, yes, as teams can develop their transactive memory systems and become more specialized and hone in or focus on more specialized information, it also increases the importance of social safety, because if one person shuts down, you're losing a whole heck of a lot more. So, in summary, this has been a lot, and I hope I've made all this as digestible as possible. But in summary, going back to tie everything up in a little bow tie here, we have the team's communication bandwidth, and there are 3 things that you could fill this bandwidth with, and that being just general information sharing. We have general information sharing. You can fill it up with that. You could fill it up with, team banter, chatter. That's important. It's important to socialize. And there's also going to be some silence, and silence is okay to have. And I would go as far as to say that silence is important, and of varying importance at different, phases of the game. So there's this, team communicated bandwidth, and it's going to be occupied by either actual information sharing, by just social banter, enjoying yourselves, and also this element of silence. But within this blue section, within this actual information sharing, it's important for teams to know what to expect from team members. And when teams start to have these conversations about what to expect from team members regarding the information that they are sharing, teams can really start to specialize and develop the transactive memory system. The transactive memory system of a team is the system in which team members can specialize more and more and focus more and more in specific roles, because their range of responsibility shrinks so they can specialize more, and team members are aware of the specializations of each other person, and they trust and can rely upon that person to share the information that is important to them. Teams can change this transactive memory system using after action reviews, or debriefing the game after the game is played out, or after the series. And this is the appropriate time to do it after the game, after the series. You can talk about, hey, I felt like X, Y, and Z wasn't communicated a lot. Was this the role of somebody? If it wasn't the role of somebody, maybe someone can take that responsibility upon themselves. Or maybe it was the role of somebody, and they say, hey man, I'm sorry, I just didn't think that was important for me to communicate. But now that I know you want me to communicate it, now I will start to communicate that information with you all. So teams that develop, that learn about, can recognize the importance of this transactive memory system and also develop this transactive memory system, can really start to think critically about what information they want shared. They could have conversations about how it is shared, and how efficiently, they want it shared. And they could really start to maximize the blue section of the bandwidth, the actual information sharing. They could really start to hone this down, really start to maximize what they're getting with the actual communication, like information sharing portion of their overall communication bandwidth.